Okay, Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. So I thought I would do just a quick little stream here. I had from some new Muslims some questions come in rather, about the 15th of Sha'ban, which today just so happens to be the 15th of Sha'ban. And so some new Muslims in the community were saying, "Hey, we've seen flyers for special events for the 15th of Sha'ban, doing special things for it and whatnot, and uh, reading things online and social media posts, kind of extolling the month of Sha'ban and whatnot." And so I decided, well, how can I tackle this outside of the regular way of, you know, bid'ah, which I'm not making light of, right? Because obviously there is an opinion that it is an innovation. And what I want to emphasize first and foremost, before we get to what I'm going to say about it, is that understand that this is a ikhtilaf, right? This is khilaf fiqhi. This is an issue of a difference of opinion amongst scholars based upon the adillah, based upon the proofs, of which there is a great amount of opinion about this that, as you could probably guess, is going to fall into one of two camps. One camp is going to say, no, there's no justification for singling out the 15th of Sha'ban as a special night of worship, and that all of the ahadith, all of the statements, all of the proofs that are attached to it are basically fabricated, that they're unreliable and should be ignored, and therefore it's not permissible. And as you can guess, the other camp is that we have either some types of proofs that we can claim that might be somewhat valid, or opinions that say, well, despite those things, it has become something that the Salihun have done, and on and on and on. So, to cut to the chase, I personally take the first opinion that there is no solid, reliable proof to single out the 15th of Sha'ban. And I will go into some of the proofs for that being, for that reason, for that being. That being said, this should not cause people to argue or to fight. If you're a person such as myself that says, no, I've looked at the evidences and I don't see a valid reason for doing so, and therefore I will not be doing that, then, be content with that and don't cause argumentation amongst your fellow Muslims or think poorly of them, even if you happen to believe that they are mistaken on this particular fiqh issue, right? And so there's a tendency today in the zaman of social media, right, in the epoch and the era of social media, is to take fiqh differences and to essentially just blow them up and exaggerate them into creedal matters, right? So if somebody believes that they should do some special acts of devotion on the 15th of Sha'ban, and you take the opinion that there is no solid opinions of doing so, you may emphatically disagree with them. You may even think that they are wrong to do so, but you should not think of them poorly as a Muslim, meaning in terms of their creed, of their aqidah, right? This is purely an issue of fiqh, and we should not exaggerate these to the point where we deem them to be creedal errors of people. So I wanted to make that point first before we dive into it. I will largely be giving my opinions based upon the madhab of the school of Medina, better known as the Maliki madhab, named after Imam Marc bin Anas rahimahullah, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him. And I'm not going to go too in depth. I really want to keep this like actually pretty short and sweet little commentary here. So as it relates to disagreeing with that it is permissible, yes, there are strong opinions in the madhab from major figures in the madhab, right? So those that saw it as a innovation, of which there are no proofs for, are people like Abu Bakr al-Qadi, Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi al-Maliki, مصنف التفسير بأحكام القرآن. He is a very famous Maliki author and scholar from the Andalusian period that wrote a very tafsir shahir, right? He wrote a very famous tafsir that is widely studied. This is called Ahkam al-Quran, or the rulings of the Quran, in which that book itself, a very well relied upon book, a very well respected book, not only amongst the Malikis but in general. And he says in that book that there are no reliable statements from the Prophet ﷺ that say that the 15th of Sha'ban should be singled out for any particular reason, and therefore he says this practice should either, if it is your practice, it should be abandoned, and if you don't practice it, this is not a practice you should acquire. So you have statements from him. You have statements from some other pretty significant scholars in the Maliki madhab. So, for instance, you have also a-Sabqi. They're coming and doing street cleaning. So you have a-Sabqi, another major scholar who also essentially agrees with the same position, as well as several other prominent Malikis, not the least of which is Al-Qurtubi, who in his book, if we can take this off of our little stand here. So he wrote a book about bid'ah. It's sad that this is a term that we don't even like to discuss anymore, because there's a certain group that has almost made, they've made a caricature out of discussing, innovation, unlicensed innovation in the religion. So anyway, he wrote in his book, right, Kitab al-Bid'i by the Imam al-Qurtubi. And he wrote in this, and this is, I think, a really important commentary here. And so, I don't know if you guys will be able to see this on the screen here, but anyway, I'll just put this here. So anyway, he says, قال يحيى ابن يحيى لقد كنت بالمدينة. I was in the city of Medina أيام مالك رضي الله عنه ودربه. I was in the city of Medina at the time of Imam Malik, when Imam Malik was alive, and his contemporaries. وبمصر أيام الليثي وابن القاسم وابن الوهب. I was also in Egypt during the time of Layth and Ibn al-Qasim and Ibn al-Wahhab. Now, for those who aren't familiar, these are the major foundational scholars and contemporaries of Imam Malik. And he says, وَمَدْ أَدْرَكْتَنِي تِلْكَ اللَّيْلَةُ مَعَهُمْ. He said, I was never informed during all of my time studying with them, listening to them, teaching, and giving opinions. Again, this is Imam Malik and his contemporaries. Never once was there anything mentioned about this. فَمَا سَمِعْتُ لَهَا عِنْدَ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمْ ذِكْرًا. There was no mention of it whatsoever. وَلَوْ ثَبَتَ عِنْدَهُمْ لَا أَجْرَوْا مِنْ ذِكْرِهَا مَا أَجْرَوْا مِنْ سَائِرِ مَا ثَبَتَ عِنْدَهُمْ. And that if it had been of major importance, then it would have been mentioned just as they had mentioned all kinds of other matters that were important. And again, I'm not going to read you the whole book. So, amongst the Malikiyya, predominantly, you can say there are those that said, full stop, it is bid'ah, mamnu'ah. It's a bid'ah, can't do it, no go. Then you had other scholars amongst the Malikiyya, and this is the other important part, because I know sometimes people like to, it's a bid'ah, you can't do it. Well, there's a little thing called nuance. that's extremely important. And nuance from some very also heavy heaters, even though admittedly they are perhaps from slightly later generations. So you have, for instance, those, as he says, الرأل الفرقي الثاني القائل للكراهة. So then the second opinion is that you have those that stated that it was makruh to do so. They didn't like it and it shouldn't be done. And importantly, they had conditions of this karaha. They had conditions upon which this was a disliked practice. But there will also be a caveat. And so amongst these, for instance, is at-tanuhi and al-qarafi. So these are like, majorly important. I mean, the former being in roughly the 6th century Hijrah, and al-Qarafi being in the 7th century Hijrah. So, perhaps obviously somewhat later on, but they held the opinion that it was not outright bid'ah, but it was disliked. And so what they said is that if you do it in places, and if I look here, like in the text that he reads, he said what? Fi amakin shahira. If you do it in well-known places, he said مثل المساجد والجماعة. He said, for instance, if you're going to hold this as a collective act, right? You're going to do it in jama'ah, and you're going to gather at the masjid, and you're going to gather at the jami'. You're going to go to the special places of prayer, and you do it in these places. And they said, no. This is definitely should not be done. But rather, it can be nadab, it can be praiseworthy, as he says, munfaridan. It can be a praiseworthy act if you do this by yourself and in your home. So again, this is the opinion of Al-Qarafi and some other latter-day scholars from the Malikiya that said, we agree with those that came before us that it should not be a communal practice, but we find some disagreement that it could be done as individual acts of devotion. And this is the part that I want to actually emphasize here. Now, obviously, there are those going to say, no, we disagree with that altogether. Jaiz, you can do it and so on. I disagree with that. But again, I'm not going to fight you to the mat on it. If that's what you do, fine. I'm just not going to join you in that. But I think the more important commentary here and the insight that is very important for us to consider is that when it comes to acts of worship and devotion, we have become so accustomed to everything being spectacle. And what I mean by spectacle is the idea of doing acts of devotion to Allah Ta'ala, to worshiping our Creator in prayer, in dhikr, by oneself, in the quietness and solitude of one's home with nobody else participating in you, is almost becoming strange amongst us. That everything has to be a qiyam. Even when we have a qiyam, there has to be food. I mean, we're supposed to have this qiyam tomorrow night, which is not the 15th of Sha'ban, right? We're supposed to have a qiyam tomorrow night, inshallah, at Middle Ground. And when we were discussing what we wanted to do in terms of, preparing for it, I said, well, they were saying, well, should we have food and this and that? Like, why do we need to have food? If you're coming to the masjid at night to hear a program about Ramadan and preparing for Ramadan, as well as, right, don't forget about the month of Sha'ban and our devotions in that month, why do we need food? Like, why do we constantly have to stuff our mouths and be entertained and proverbially wined and dined when 99 out of 100 of us are not missing any meals? We have plenty of food rotting in our refrigerators, and our cupboards are stuffed with things we're probably going to throw out because they'll go bad before we can even use them. And so there is I think, there is definitely a wisdom, there is a hikmah, and there is a fa'idah, there's a real benefit in the opinions of the early scholars that when you delve into their writings, you will see that they're just not saying, okay, adma adilla sahiha mamnu'a. They're not merely saying, in the absence of a verifiable nuss or verifiable proof that all bets are off. That's an important part of it. But what they're also saying is that as it relates to the topic of bid'ah, remember, bid'ah in itself is like a kind of, as we say, it's like tanafus bit-tanzil or tanafus bis-sunnah. And this actually is something that's from, I think, Al-Qarafi's writing and Imam Al-Shatibi's writing, that they said, well, what is the real meaning of bid'ah? Well, of course, bid'ah means to, like, Allah, badi'u samawati wal ard, that Allah Ta'ala originated the heavens and the earth out of nothing. But it also means to not only, to create something new, but to create it new with a sense of authenticity. And so, we create things and then also have the problem of leaving off others. So I think the real interesting thing is that every year people get all excited about the 15th of Sha'ban, which there's no doubt. There are definitely textual, there's a burden of proof upon those that want to legitimize it. That is problematic. Let's just say it like that. And I know people will give their counter proofs. And for those learned people that might disagree with me or, Ibn al-Qasim or Ibn al-Arabi al-Maliki, fine. But what I have an issue with is from the unlearned that are just going to learn from, the reels on TikTok and YouTube and other things, and they're getting inspired about their religion, but they're getting inspiration without any indoctrination of knowledge, right? This is very, very problematic. And so what happens is they wind up leaving a lot on the table that the Kitab and the Sunnah have instructed us to do. And what I mean by that is, for instance, we just 15 days ago left behind the month of Rajab, which is one of what? Hurum. It's one of the 4 sacred months. One of the 4 sacred months is the month of Rajab. And Allah says what? وَلَا تَظْلِمُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ فِيهِنَّ. وَلَا تَظْلِمُوا فِيهَا أَنفُسَكُمْ. Don't wrong yourselves in that month. What did we do in the month of Rajab? Nothing. Sat around, drank our lattes, watched, Squid Game or Squidward or, we just squandered our time in the month of Rajab. Then, in the month of Sha'ban, we didn't care about the first day to the 14th day. But there's this one magical day that I can go to the masjid and do some act of devotion because it's convenient and there's some hoopla about it. I haven't really done any real due diligence to learn about it or whatnot. And then from the 16th until the beginning of Ramadan, we're just waiting for Ramadan. Well, what if we don't make it to Ramadan? So, again, I don't want the 15th of Sha'ban, and it should not be a source of argumentation, especially amongst people that don't really have the capacity, the capability to really engage in the topic, to have done the research and to know the sources. It should not. Obviously, if you have enough to say, well, you know what, it's been presented to me, and I agree that there's not enough textual proof to single out the 15th of Sha'ban, and so I'm not going to do it. Tamam, no problem, like myself, right? But to create further argumentation and division and hatred amongst the Muslims and tension, this is not something we should be doing. So I wanted to leave this here as a very quick cursory. And again, if you happen to watch this video, inshallah, I'm going to upload it to YouTube. If you happen to watch this video, understand this is not going to give you enough cannon fodder, so to speak, to go out and fight and argue with people about it. Hopefully, it will present to you a cursory overview for those that maybe had their doubts or were uncomfortable or had heard that it isn't and it's legitimate not to do it, right? It's kind of like the Mawlid. Like there are plenty of strong proofs that the Mawlid is also an innovation and that it should not be done. And some people almost feel guilty for not doing the Mawlid. So this is to give you the confidence to say, yes, okay, I'm not going to do it. And there's strong textual proof to believe that I shouldn't do it, and leave it at that. This is not going to give you ijaza, so to speak, license to go out and fight and argue with people. So I just wanted to leave this, and inshallah, may Allah Ta'ala, have mercy upon us and guide us, to the Sirat al-Mustaqim, guide us to the Uswa and the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Inshallah, in ij'alna min as-salihin. May Allah Ta'ala make us from amongst the righteous. Wa salawatuhu wa salamuhu ala nabiyhi al-kareem wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Jazakum Allahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum.